From Anchored in Faith Gospel Church in Oxford, Iowa, this is Anchored in Faith.
Okay, we're going to finish off Gideon, send him to his fathers. And, you know, the reason we look at people like Gideon is because, well, first of all, he's in Hebrews. He's in the Hall of Fame. And if you don't know what that is, that's Hebrews 11. That's where the writer accounts all of the famous people that, you know, of faith. And Gideon's one of them. You know, Moses, Abraham, Noah, Samson, Moses, all of these people are there, as well as other people that it's kind of too numerous to mention. They're not as well known, but there's always this faithful remnant, and that's what we're looking at. I mean, times are bad in the book of Judges. The whole book of Judges is nothing but apostasy and bondage, and then a leader comes forward and frees them from whoever, and they go right back into their mess. And so Gideon is one that we look at because he responded. And if you think about Gideon, here's a guy who I can't even see where any religious training is coming from at all, because I can't find any commentary. Of course, I haven't read them all, but the ones I use, I can't seem to find what happened to the priests and the Levites and the tabernacle and the sacrifice, and all of this is supposed to be going on in Israel. You know, they had the tabernacle, not the temple, but they had the tabernacle, and that was the place of worship. That's where the sacrifices were supposed to be made. That's where people were supposed to be going on the festivals and making their offerings. And the priests, the Levites, were supposed to be teaching the people the law and judging them according to the law. You know, they'd bring their disputes to the priest, and he would say, okay, all right, this is what the law says, this is what you're to do. And none of this seems to be going on. And yet Gideon, of course, the Lord appears to him, and he responds. Now, how does he even know who the true God is? I don't know. His father's a Baal worshiper, I guess. He's got an idol in his yard, and that's all that I can see that Gideon even knows about. Yet he responds, and he becomes a hero and a judge, and he defeats the Midianites. So he's got a lot of problems. He's not, you know, again, if we look by our modern way of thinking, he's a failure. You know, he doesn't do anything right that we think needs to be done today, but yet he is considered a faithful hero of the faith and somebody who is pleasing to God. And it was his faith that pleased God. You always have to remember, it's only your faith that's going to please God, not your works. Now, we can get all this faith and works thing, you know, everybody's been through that, but if you have faith, you'll produce some works. And but it's only your faith that pleases God. You know, Abraham was called and he responded. That's what pleased God. Gideon was called, he responded. Noah was called and he responded. He built the ark. He preached for 120 years. You know, Moses saw the burning bush. He responded. He fell on his face, you know. And so that's what is pleasing to God. Now, if you're listening to this on wherever, TV, see, you don't have to join anything to come to God. You respond. You say, as Pastor Linda said, I give up. I can't serve God. I can't please God. Martin Luther came to that conclusion. You know, he was a priest. He would serve God for years and did everything and could not please God. And he read the book of Hebrews and he said, the just shall live by faith. Faith. And that's what saved him. And so when you see our show or you hear somebody witness to you, it's your faith that's going to please God. And when you have faith, it's going to produce some works. And so we'll leave that alone, but that's what Gideon did. He responded in spite of no religious education. There's people listening now, they've never been to church. They haven't heard anything. They don't know anything about the Bible. But if God is speaking to them and they respond, he'll find a way to get you where you're supposed to be to get taught and, learn what you need to learn to serve God. So let's go to Judges, chapter 8, verse 22. We'll start there. We're looking at Gideon as a ruler. Now, Gideon was offered the kingship. Israel said, you've won this great victory. You can be our king. And he rejected that. Now, it says, we'll just read it. It says, the men of Israel said unto Gideon, rule thou over us, both thou and thy son's son also. For thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian. And Gideon said unto them, I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. Now that's good. That sounds good. That was the plan of God at this point. No king. And Gideon said unto them, I would desire a request of you that ye would give me, every man, the earrings of his prey. And verse 25 said, we will willingly give them. And you know the story. He made an ephod. And we already talked about this. The ephod was the breastplate the high priest wore, and it had the stones, 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel. He had a front piece and a back piece. So any way he turned in the tabernacle, the tribes of Israel were always before God in remembrance. Now, it doesn't say that he made an ephod like the high priest, but it was some sort of garment that I guess he wore it around, and he made it, and it became a snare, became something to be worshipped. They gave him the gold from the Midianites and the golden chains and all of the ornaments, the earrings, and it says he made ephod, verse 27, Gideon made an ephod thereof and put it in his city, even in Ophrah. And all Israel went hither a whoring after it, which thing became a snare unto Gideon and his house. So they came there to worship it. Just like in Moses' time, they made the golden calf. He was up on Mount Sinai getting the law, and they're down thinking that he's dead, that God's killed him. And so they make this idol, and they say, well, this is the God that brought you out of the desert. And it was an Egyptian god. It was a god of the Egyptians that they had seen there. The Egyptians worshiped the calf god. A lot of their gods were half man, half animal, and this was one of them. So Gideon's got some religious thing that he's made, and everybody, and it says when they went a-whoring, spiritually, God looks at idolatry as prostitution. Right. That's the way he describes it all through the Old Testament. Right. Israel runs after foreign gods, and it's prostitution. And so that's what this means, is that they're chasing after this ephod, which I think, and I'm guessing, this is my opinion, I think there was some image of Baal on this. Because Baal is so deeply involved in the Old Testament. I mean, there's 63 references to Baal in the King James. And so this Baal worship was very deep in Israel. Just like the worship of the Queen of Heaven and the worship of Moloch and all these other gods were all very deeply embedded in Israel. Now you have this two-tiered system. We talked about this. You have the official religion that was given to Moses. Priests, temple, sacrifices, law, all of that. And you have this underground current It's always going on. There's an underground. There's a religious underground in Israel all through the Old Testament. They're worshiping in secret. They're worshiping in groves. They're worshiping in underground places, in mountaintops, all these things. And they're going to church and they're going somewhere else. And so we have this in Israel through the whole time. And the fact that Baal appears so often shows, how deep this was. One of the months of the year in the calendar of Israel is Tammuz. Tammuz is a pagan god. And they named one of the months after him in their calendar. That's how deep that was in Israel. So, again, we have this man who just responds to God with all this idolatry around him. And I think that's what God is going to do in our day. We have the churches, which we won't even go there. We've been there many times, but some of these churches are just, you wouldn't even believe it. We don't see it. We're in little Iowa here. But some of these big mega churches, there's so much stuff going on that you wouldn't recognize it as anything biblical, because they're doing anything they need to bring them in. So, and again, we've said before that the modern church is right now in the position where they forbid what the Christian can do, for example, speaking in tongues, prophesying, laying hands. You do that in a lot of churches, they'll show you the door. Right, Pastor Linda? Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. That's right. And that's the way it is. You get something they think is out of line, they'll show you the door. But yet they'll allow what the Bible forbids. Gay marriage, sexual shenanigans, financial shenanigans, all sorts of things to keep people in. So let's look in the mirror when we look at Israel, because we have a two-tiered system of religiosity in this country and the great underground current. Sammy Davis Jr. and Anton LaVey and Michael Aquino, these are people high up in our society. Sammy Davis Jr., a very famous man, and Anton LaVey, of course, everybody knows he's the founder of the Church of Satan, which had a lot of followers from Hollywood and celebrities. Jane Mansfield was one of them, and Michael Aquino was a military officer, very high up in the intelligence community, and wrote a lot of these programs that spy on people's phones and spy on people's activities. He was very much involved. Now, he's still around. But these people are involved in things that are so, you remember Johnny, I think I told you this, Johnny Gosch. Remember the newsboy from Des Moines that was kidnapped years ago? Johnny Gosch, the first one they ever put on the milk carton. He was delivering papers, he got abducted. Well, Michael Aquino was questioned about that disappearance because he's the head of the Temple of Set in San Francisco. He's a Satan priest. He is a high level, he's probably the new Anton LaVey, because LaVey is dead now. But we have this stuff that goes so high in our society, and yet we are supposedly this great Christian nation, that has the gospel. In God we trust, we have it on our coins, we open Congress with prayer, all the state legislatures, it's a form of godliness, just like Israel had. And so, again, we need to look at this because, as I said before, when Pastor John was alive, he said there was prophetically a relationship between the United States and Israel. And I never really got all that teaching, but he believed that they were connected and that they were going to be united, I believed, in the end time or something. But we in Israel are related. So we're not just some big country that happened to be formed. We're in prophecy in end time. So, but we're much like they are. We have all of this double stuff going on. And I'm going to say something, we're excited about our new president. We're excited about the opportunity, but some of this stuff is going to be, it's so deep that we're just not going to be able to attack it all. I don't know exactly how to say it, but our new president is not the Messiah, okay? He's a man, so he's going to do as much as he can do, and God's going to be with him, I believe that. But all this stuff is still, there, and it's going to take a real cleansing and an exposure that we've never seen before. We saw some of it. Some of this stuff, that was leaked and all this, some kinky stuff going on. And so, again, we look a lot like Israel. But let's talk about Gideon, because he didn't accept the kingship, but he acted like a king. First of all, of course, he supported idolatry. And then he, if you look at verse 30. And Gideon had 70 sons of his body, for he had many wives. Now, if you look at Deuteronomy 17:17, let's go back there. Moses had a prophecy as the law was being given here in Deuteronomy, that in verse 14 it says, when thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, and shall possess it, and shall dwell therein, and shall say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me. And thou shalt in any wise set a king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose from among thy brethren. Thou shalt set king over thee, thou mayest not set a stranger, which is thy brother. Okay, and he shall not multiply horses to himself, because the people, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, to the end that he should multiply horses, for as much as the Lord hath said to you, ye henceforth return no more that way. Neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away. Neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. And that's what Gideon did. He had multiple wives. I'm assuming they're all Israelites, but maybe not. I think one of them at least, says his concubine bore him a son whose name was Abimelech. Now I think at least one of his wives was a Canaanite. So this is a command. Now Moses is looking in the future, and he's saying at some point Israel is going to want a king like the nations around them. And she did. Yeah. And so God gave him the king. He gave him Saul. And he said that the king is not supposed to multiply wives and horses and chariots, because it puffs him up. And taking these wives, the temptation is to take a wife from the Egyptians to keep peace with the Egyptians. Take a wife from the Hittites to keep peace from the Hittites. So you don't have to go to war. That's what Solomon did. And they brought their gods with them, because in those days, the nations and the gods were associated together. David took multiple wives, but they were all Israelites. He never took a foreign wife. He understood that part. He'd rather go to war than take a foreign wife. Solomon was just the opposite. He'd rather take a wife than go to war. So, but that's just the way it is. But the commandment was, you're not supposed to do this, and Gideon did. And he multiplied gold, and he multiplied, things to himself, and acted like a king. Even though he said, I don't want to be your king, and that was a nice religious thing to say at that time. All right. And so in verse 33, we see that Israel, at the death of Gideon, came to pass as soon as Gideon was dead, that the children of Israel turned again and went a whoring after Balaam, and made Baal Berith their god. Now, Baal Berith means the Baal of the covenant. In other words, they are making covenants. They're pledging themselves to this god. They're not just sneaking in the woods and making a sacrifice. They're pledging themselves to this god. And usually that involves stuff like blood oaths and cutting yourself and shedding blood and sexual rites and all sorts of things. So they're really going from bad to worse. Gideon dies and they can't wait. And I have to say, in our modern day, we have people who can't wait to be deceived. They're joining religions, they can't wait. They're becoming Muslims, and Cedar Rapids, they have a lot of people who are not from another country that are Muslims. Now, when I worked for I used to service the Islamic Center. That was one of my services I had to do every month. And sometimes I would try to be there when they didn't have their prayer time, and sometimes I had to wait till they were done. And there were a lot of Americans who had converted to Islam. Even this was back in the 90s when I worked for them. So the people are waiting for anything to take them away. And yet the Christians, they won't even listen to us. We have the truth. Jesus died for us. Muhammad didn't die for anybody. Buddha didn't die for anybody. Muhammad's got people dying for him, killing people for him. We're not commanded to do that. And so people, just like in there, they're waiting. They just can't wait to get hooked up with something, and especially young people. They're looking for something. And when they find it, they lock in. Whether it's a religion, whether it's a gang, whether it's sports, whether it's whatever they want. When they see it, they're in. And they'll do whatever. And, you join a gang, they're going to tell you how to live. They're going to tell you exactly what you can do and can't do. You join Islam. Oh, women, ladies, you're back in the 7th century, honey. You can forget that women's lib stuff. You're back in the 7th century. But yet people are standing in line to be deceived. There's people that have no idea what real move of God is. And the young people that have been through here have seen it, but that's the exception. Most young people today aren't in church, and any kind of church. And so we need to just rededicate ourselves to doing more for the Lord. We just got to step out and have courage, because we're it. There's other churches like us. We're not the only one, preaching the truth or anything. But churches like us, are few and far between, and Pastor Linda knows. She knows pastors all over. She knows what's going on.
We were out running the dog through the river bottom, which we do virtually every day, either day or night. That dog, he's a very demanding dog. He's an athlete, and he's a hunting dog, and he just has to hunt something, or otherwise he'll drive you crazy. So we're running the dog on the river bottom, and it's hot. He's tough though. What do we run him about 7, 8 miles, 6 miles anyway? Anyway, we're listening to the radio, and they played a couple of songs, and then these Catholics came on and started talking. And they were talking about 2 cardinals high up in the church. One who had been a Buddhist, and he was from the East, and he'd become Christian, or what they call Christian, and the other one was from the West, and he had embraced Eastern mysticism with his Christianity. And they said both of them were true Christians. They'd never left the faith. But they read from all the other books, from Hindu books and all this stuff, and these guys are high up. And then they said, well, you know, and this was the final statement. It was about a half an hour, and the more we listened, Linda wanted me to turn it off and said, no, I got to hear this stuff. She says, this is evil. I said, yes. They said, all these other religions are merely another path to the same destination. And you can incorporate them all together. Universalism, any religion will do. No other way. I am so narrow-minded. And people say, oh, boy, you are narrow-minded. Yes, I am. Jesus says the way to glory is narrow, and few are those who find it. That's the Bible. And the way to destruction is broad, and many will go therein. I just couldn't hardly believe what I heard.
Full sermons are available anytime at www.anchoredinfaith.org. Contact us by calling 319-828-4815 or write us at Anchored in Faith, P.O. Box 204, Oxford, Iowa 52322, or email us at tv@anchoredinfaith.org. This has been a copyrighted presentation of Anchored in Faith Gospel Church, Oxford, Iowa.